The world did not wake up one morning in 1939 and suddenly decide to burn. No, the fire had been smoldering for 20 long, bitter years. It began not with tanks, not with bombs, not with the thunder of marching boots, but with humiliation, with ink on paper, with signatures written in a palace outside Paris. In 1919, inside the glittering hall of mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, the victors of the First World War gathered to shape the future. But what they truly shaped was resentment. The Treaty of Versailles was meant to ensure peace. Instead, it planted the seeds of the deadliest conflict in human history. Germany, defeated and exhausted, was forced to accept full blame for the war. Article 231, the infamous War Guilt Clause, declared that Germany alone was responsible. To many Germans, this was not justice. It was shame carved into their national identity. They were stripped of territory, their army reduced to a shadow, their navy shattered, their air force banned entirely. They were ordered to pay staggering reparations, some so enormous that generations would suffer. It was not simply punishment. It was economic suffocation. Factories slowed, workers starved, savings evaporated. In the early 1920s, hyperinflation spiraled out of control. Money became worthless paper. Children played with stacks of banknotes like toys, because it was cheaper than buying real ones. Housewives rushed to markets with wheelbarrows full of cash, only to find prices doubling before they reached the counter. The humiliation was not just political, it was personal. Every German family felt it. And humiliation, when mixed with hunger and anger, becomes something dangerous. Meanwhile, the world pretended stability had returned. The League of Nations was created to prevent another global conflict. Leaders spoke of cooperation and diplomacy. But beneath that fragile optimism lay unresolved tensions. The treaty did not merely punish Germany, it redrew the entire map of Europe and the Middle East. Empires collapsed. Borders were drawn hastily, often ignoring ethnic realities. Hungary dissolved into smaller states. The Ottoman Empire was carved apart. New nations like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia emerged, but they were fragile creations, filled with internal divisions. Millions of people suddenly found themselves minorities inside foreign borders. Nationalism did not disappear after World War I, it intensified. Across Europe, extremist ideologies simmered quietly, waiting for opportunity. In Germany, that opportunity arrived in the form of economic catastrophe. The fragile Weimar Republic, Germany's new democratic government, struggled from its first breath. Many Germans blamed it for signing the Treaty of Versailles. To them, democracy became associated with weakness and surrender. Then came 1929. The Great Depression began in the United States, but rippled across the globe like a tidal wave. American loans that had been propping up Germany were suddenly recalled. Banks collapsed. Factories shut down. Unemployment soared into the millions. Desperation returned, worse than before. And in desperate times, people search for strong voices. They search for certainty. They search for someone to blame. That voice belonged to Adolf Hitler. He was not an accident of history. He was a product of it. A failed artist, a World War I veteran, and a master of emotional manipulation. Hitler understood something powerful people respond to pride. He promised to restore Germany's honor. He promised to tear up the Treaty of Versailles. He promised jobs, strength, and unity. But most dangerously, he offered simple explanations for complex problems. According to him, Germany had not truly lost World War I on the battlefield. It had been betrayed from within. He blamed Jews, communists, and political opponents. He turned minorities into scapegoats. And millions listened. The Nazi Party grew not because every German supported hatred, but because many supported hope, or what they believed was hope. Hitler's speeches were theatrical storms of emotion. Flags, uniforms, music, they created a sense of belonging in a time of chaos. By 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Within months, democracy was dismantled, opposition silenced, power centralized. Germany transformed from fragile republic to totalitarian state. And the world watched. But here lies one of the real reasons World War II happened. The world did not act when it still could. Britain and France, exhausted from the horrors of World War I, were reluctant to confront Germany again. The memory of trenches, gas attacks, and millions of dead haunted their populations. Politicians believed compromise was better than conflict. This policy became known as appeasement. When Hitler rebuilt Germany's military in violation of the treaty, there were protests but no war. When he reoccupied the Rhineland in 1936, an act directly forbidden by Versailles, France had the military power to stop him. But they hesitated. Hitler later admitted that if France had marched then, Germany would have retreated. Instead, his gamble succeeded. Each victory without resistance strengthened him. Meanwhile, another force was reshaping Europe: fascism in Italy. Benito Mussolini had already seized power in 1922, promising to restore Roman glory. Like Hitler, he believed in aggressive expansion and authoritarian control. In Asia, Japan was following a similar path. Industrialized but resource-poor, Japan sought expansion to secure raw materials. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria. The League of Nations condemned it, but did nothing meaningful. This pattern repeated itself: aggression met with words, not consequences. The message was clear: international law was fragile. The 1930s became a decade of bold testing. Hitler annexed Austria in 1938, the Anschluss, again no war. Then he demanded the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with a large German-speaking population. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew to meet Hitler, believing he could secure peace through negotiation. The Munich Agreement allowed Germany to take the Sudetenland in exchange for Hitler's promise of no further territorial claims. Chamberlain returned home declaring, "Peace for our time." But it was an illusion. Within months, Hitler occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. His ambitions were never limited. They were always expansionist. So why did World War II truly happen? It was not caused by one man alone. It was born from a chain reaction of fear, revenge, economic collapse, nationalism, and global hesitation. The Treaty of Versailles created resentment. The Great Depression created desperation. Weak international enforcement created opportunity. Extremist ideologies provided direction. Each factor fed the other like oxygen to flame. And then there was ideology, the most explosive ingredient of all. Hitler did not simply want to reverse Versailles. He believed in racial hierarchy. He believed Germany needed Lebensraum, living space, in Eastern Europe. He envisioned a vast empire carved from Poland and the Soviet Union. This was not defensive thinking. It was conquest by design. His hatred of communism and Jews was central to his worldview. War, in his mind, was inevitable. Peace was temporary. By 1939, Europe stood on the edge of a cliff. The final spark came when Germany demanded the Polish Corridor, territory that separated mainland Germany from East Prussia. Poland refused. Britain and France, finally realizing appeasement had failed, guaranteed Poland's independence. Hitler, calculating as ever, signed a non-aggression pact with Joseph Stalin, the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Secretly, they agreed to divide Poland between them. It shocked the world. Two ideological enemies cooperating for strategic gain, but it was tactical brilliance. Germany avoided a two-front war for now. On September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland using blitzkrieg, lightning war, combining tanks, aircraft, and rapid movement to overwhelm defenses. It was modern warfare unleashed with terrifying efficiency. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The second global conflict had begun. But remember this: the invasion of Poland was not the beginning of the story. It was the explosion after years of pressure. The real reasons stretched back to 1919, to humiliation, to economic collapse, to the failure of international unity, to the rise of extremist ideologies fueled by fear. World War II happened because the world tried to build peace on punishment instead of reconciliation, because leaders underestimated ambition, because democracies hesitated, because ordinary people, suffering and searching for stability, placed faith in dangerous promises. History is rarely about a single event. It is about momentum. And by 1939, that momentum was unstoppable. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Europe officially entered war. But the conflict that followed was not immediately the global firestorm history remembers. In fact, for months after Britain and France declared war on Germany, there was an eerie silence on the Western Front. Soldiers waited. Governments prepared. Civilians feared what might come. This strange period became known as the phony war. But behind that temporary stillness, massive forces were gathering. The real reason World War II escalated into a truly global catastrophe lies not only in Hitler's ambition, but in the way multiple expansionist powers, ideological rivalries, and strategic miscalculations collided at the same moment in history. The war was not just European. It was the result of a worldwide shift toward militarism and empire, building that had been building for decades. Germany's early victories were swift and terrifying. In April 1940, Hitler turned north, invading Denmark and Norway to secure strategic naval routes and iron ore supplies. Both fell quickly. Then came May 1940, the moment that shattered the illusion of safety in Western Europe. German forces unleashed blitzkrieg against Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg before driving into France itself. The speed was unprecedented. Tanks bypassed heavily fortified positions like the Maginot Line, cutting deep through the Ardennes forest, a region the French believed impassable. Within weeks, one of Europe's greatest military powers collapsed. Paris fell in June. France surrendered. The shock was immense. The same nation that had demanded harsh punishment at Versailles now stood defeated. Europe trembled. But even at this moment of dominance, Hitler faced a strategic dilemma. Britain refused to surrender. Winston Churchill, newly appointed Prime Minister, rejected negotiation. His speeches did not promise easy victory. They promised resistance. "We shall fight on the beaches," he declared, igniting morale across Britain. Hitler planned Operation Sea Lion, an invasion of the British Isles, but first he needed air superiority. What followed was the Battle of Britain. For months in 1940, the skies roared with aircraft. German bombers targeted airfields and cities. London burned during the Blitz. Civilians huddled in underground stations as bombs fell nightly. Yet Britain did not break. The Royal Air Force held the line. For the first time, Hitler's momentum stalled. The invasion was postponed indefinitely. It was a turning point, proof that Nazi Germany was not invincible. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, the secret clauses of the Nazi-Soviet Pact were being executed. Poland had been divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. The Baltic states were absorbed by Stalin. Finland resisted Soviet invasion in the Winter War, exposing weaknesses in the Red Army, but ultimately losing territory. On the surface, Germany and the Soviet Union were partners. But this partnership was built on suspicion. Hitler despised communism. Stalin distrusted fascism. Their agreement was temporary, a strategic pause before inevitable confrontation. The real reason the war would grow even larger lies in this fragile, cynical alliance between two dictators who both sought expansion. Beyond Europe, another empire was already at war. Japan had been fighting in China since 1937 in a brutal campaign marked by atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre. Japan's leadership believed survival depended on expansion. The island nation lacked oil, rubber, and vital resources. Western colonial powers, Britain, France, the Netherlands, controlled much of Southeast Asia. To Japanese militarists, these territories represented both opportunity and destiny. They envisioned a greater East Asia prosperity sphere, a euphemism for imperial domination. Like Germany and Italy, Japan felt constrained by international agreements made after World War I. It too believed it had been denied its rightful place as a great power. By 1940, the Axis alliance formally connected Germany, Italy, and Japan. Though geographically separated, they shared ideological similarities: authoritarian rule, militarism, expansionism, and rejection of the post-World War I order. This alliance transformed regional wars into a looming global confrontation. Each power sought to revise the world system created at Versailles and Washington. And the Western democracies, particularly Britain and the United States, faced an increasingly complex challenge. Should they intervene directly, or remain cautious, scarred by the memory of the First World War. The United States, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, initially remained officially neutral. American public opinion strongly opposed entering another European war. Isolationism was powerful, but neutrality did not mean indifference. Roosevelt understood the danger posed by Axis expansion. Through programs like Lend-Lease, the U.S. supplied Britain, and later the Soviet Union, with weapons and material support. It was a calculated step short of war. However, economic sanctions against Japan, especially oil embargoes, would have explosive consequences. Japan depended heavily on American oil. Cutting it off was seen by Japanese leaders not merely as pressure, but as an existential threat. Back in Europe, Hitler made the decision that would define the war's next phase, Operation Barbarossa. On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union in the largest land invasion in history. Over 3 million Axis troops surged eastward across a vast front. The non-aggression pact was shattered. This was not merely a strategic attack, it was ideological warfare. Hitler framed it as a crusade against Bolshevism. The campaign was brutal from the outset. Entire villages were destroyed. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured. The Einsatzgruppen followed behind front lines, carrying out mass executions of Jews and political enemies. The invasion turned the European war into a struggle of annihilation. At first, German forces advanced rapidly, capturing vast territories. But the Soviet Union was immense. Supply lines stretched thin. Resistance stiffened. And then came winter, the same merciless Russian winter that had once broken Napoleon. German troops, unprepared for extreme cold, faced frostbite, equipment failures, and fierce Soviet counterattacks. The war in the East became a grinding conflict of unimaginable scale and brutality. The decision to invade the Soviet Union ensured Germany would face a two-front war, the very scenario it had feared in World War I. It was a gamble rooted in ideological obsession. Meanwhile, tensions in the Pacific were reaching breaking point. Japan's expansion into French Indochina alarmed the United States. Economic sanctions tightened. Diplomatic negotiations stalled. Japanese leaders concluded that war with America might be unavoidable. Their strategy was bold and risky: deliver a devastating surprise attack that would cripple U.S. naval power in the Pacific, buying time to secure resource-rich territories in Southeast Asia. On December 7, 1941, that plan unfolded at Pearl Harbor. Japanese aircraft struck the American fleet anchored in Hawaii. Battleships burned. Over 400 Americans were killed. The attack shocked the United States. Isolationism collapsed overnight. The following day, the United States declared war on Japan. Within days, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, honoring their alliance. The conflict was now undeniably global. Europe, Africa, Asia, the Atlantic, the Pacific, all were engulfed. What had begun as a dispute rooted in post-World War I grievances had evolved into a worldwide struggle involving industrial giants and vast empires. So why did World War II truly happen? Because aggression was rewarded until it grew uncontrollable. Because economic crisis radicalized societies. Because ideological extremism replaced diplomacy. Because global powers hesitated, calculated, misjudged, and sometimes underestimated the ambitions of dictators. The war expanded step by step: Manchuria, Ethiopia, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, France, the Soviet Union, China, Southeast Asia. Each act of expansion tested the world's resolve. Each weak response encouraged the next move. By the end of 1941, the stage was set for total war. Industrial production shifted entirely to military output. Civilians became targets. Technology accelerated destruction. And beneath it all remained the deeper truth. World War II was not inevitable in a single moment, but it became inevitable through accumulated failures, ideological rigidity, and unchecked ambition. The world could no longer turn away. War did not begin in 1939, it began in 1919, in a room filled with signatures, pride, and revenge. It began when humiliation replaced reconciliation. It began when economic collapse fed extremism. It began when leaders chose delay over courage. World War II was not just a clash of armies. It was a failure of humanity to learn from its own bloodshed. Over 70 million lives were lost, entire cities erased, civilization scarred forever, and the most haunting truth: every step toward that catastrophe was visible. The warning signs were there. The speeches were public. The invasions were gradual. But the world hesitated until hesitation turned into horror. The real reason World War II happened was not just Hitler, not just Japan, not just ideology. It was revenge without forgiveness, power without restraint, fear without wisdom. And when those forces combine, history burns. The question is not just why it happened. The question is, could it happen again? Because history does not repeat itself exactly, but it echoes, and echoes can become explosions. If you enjoy deep, cinematic World War history explained with truth and clarity, make sure you subscribe. This channel uncovers the real stories behind the biggest battles in human history. Like the video if you learned something new. And comment your thoughts. I read every single one. History is not just the past, it's a warning.